And before we continue on further, I'm going to talk more about setting up prior to mixing. You know, you have to listen to a rough draft of your mix before you start mixing. So what I tend to do is maybe if I'm working with a producer, I'll ask the producer which mixes you want to hear. Because generally, before we start, we've already recorded the music down, record all the parts, done the vocals, and we'll have a basic mix idea before we start doing anything, which is a good thing to do. That way you can go home and listen to it prior to mixing, and then write down things you want to fix or change or set up to solve some problems you think that you're having with getting your ideas across as a producer or getting your ideas across as a songwriter, so that you can have these elements you want to have heard that help to accentuate the vocals or make the rhythm groove happen better. And how we do this generally is that we have to start from some basic idea. And the most basic thing about all music is a rhythm. Rhythm is the most basic thing, whether it's rock and roll or blues or jazz, except for classical, of course. But even classical is rhythm where the strings will play against the violins or the violas against the basses. And so there's a rhythm content to everything. And so I just start with the drums first, obviously. That's the basis of most music that we hear today on the radio. So I get my drum set up. And I'll make sure my levels are set correctly, you know. I'll listen back, like here, for example. I will do what I did before. I will solo the drums out, hear my drums in a solo mix, and get an idea. Now, one thing I want to talk about also, not just the levels, but I also want to go back to the master fader. And I've got my elements there on the master fader. I won't put those in play yet, but I will keep my master fader at some point where I can hear everything basically low enough and not be too loud. So I usually keep my stuff right down here in the green, you'll see. A little bit in the orange, but I won't go too far than that. So I'll keep everything that's going in the mix, I'll keep those levels of everything that goes into my master right there. So, what we also want to do, once you get our levels straight, just a basic start-out level, you want to worry about panning at some point. You know, how are you going to pan stuff? Well, here, the kick drum, we generally maintain that in the center. And also the snare drum as well. I keep it mostly in the center itself too. I keep most of my low frequency elements like the kick drum. If I'm doing hip hop, might have an 808 drum, a real bottomy drum. You're doing reggaeton or you're doing club music, something that has real deep 808 drum, boom. That could be in a track also. Those will always maintain some sort of dead center panning position. Now the same is also for the vocals. I'll keep the vocals in the center. I just want to make sure they're wide in the center. I won't keep them dead up. I'll keep them dead up, but I'll keep them very wide and strong within the center of the track. And some EQ techniques I'll use, I will roll off bass off the vocal because it actually sounds higher, clearer, and better when you roll off bass off the vocals. Particularly with someone who sounds pretty good when they're singing. You don't want too much bass on their vocals at all. Now, I'll listen back to stuff in the mix, and I'll also, if I'm doing some sort of EQing, I don't want to do too much EQing. I just want to do just enough so I can get rid of what I think could be mud. Something that sounds a little too muddy and that's interfering with some other instruments. Now, every instrument has some frequency. You could play middle C on the piano, and a middle C on a flute, of course, is higher, but that flute has its own timbre. So that means this flute has its own timbre, its own overtones. That means when you hear a flute, you know it's a flute, and the middle C on the flute is different from middle C on the piano because the flute is its own instrument. And your ears probably already heard a lot of flutes, or heard a lot of pianos. I mean, I heard a lot of drums, heard a lot of bass sounds, like a reggae bass compared to a rock and roll bass. So you may already know this in your brain already. But you have to be aware of this also when you're mixing. You must be aware of everything and every element. So when you are in this rough mix mode, you shouldn't, for one, be drinking or smoking or anything. You need to keep your head clear and your ears clearer. That's very important when mixing. No one should be in a room talking, because you got to hear the little elements. Even when some vocalist is got a vocal on, you'll hear background noise somewhere in the track. I'm like, where's that coming from? And you don't know where it's at. You'll say, where is this noise coming from? And I won't know where it's at. You hear it right there?
We don't know. Oh, yeah. Oh.
And you'll hear some headset noise. See that little headset noise? You got to be aware of these little things that happen. You want to make sure when you press a button, you're doing a mix, and you want to do a quick stop, that you hear nothing. It's totally quiet. And the music comes back in. That is great because you have space sound and space. And that's a great element in music. It's a great surprise factor. It really heightens the sensitivity of the ears. It has a sensual feeling almost to it, where it's like, wow, that's really hot. You must make sure the mix is clean at all times. So you gotta be aware of every element going on in the mix. Now, about panning. I want to talk more about panning. Now, when you're panning in Pro Tools, it's different compared to, say, Logic or other instruments. Logic, I think the panning is like 3 dB louder to the left or right. In Pro Tools, if I pan something, this is going to be 3 or 4 dB to the left or the right. I'm going to look at an instrument right here I want to talk about, which is this guitar I have right here. I have a guitar here, as you can see, and I'm going to solo it up. I'm going to go to right where it's at, first of all, in the mix, and I'm going to select this section right here. I'm in grid mode, as you can see right there, make it easier for me. And then I also want to go along here and make sure I got everything else cut off. So I want to keep all these vocals off. And I want to mute the vocals. Mute this vocal here and mute this one here. Good. Now, I'll play the guitar. Turn the drums off. I want to go right back to my guitar right here and solo it.
Ooh.
Turn up a little louder. Now you can see from right there that the guitar is a little bit louder on the left than it is on the right. Now some instruments that you may get a Korg Triton or a Korg Triton Extreme or a Motif or whatever families or these synthesis keyboards, and they already have these patches, these preset sounds. And sometimes they'll be heavier to the left or right at times. The sound will be moving to give that kind of effect, you know? So you listen to it back in the head, it sounds great. When you're mixing, you want to make sure nothing's too heavy left, too heavy right. You want to have this balance going on in your mix where you're compensating from one to the other, which makes it so great to have automation, because then you can automate some parts. In this case, I'm just going to try and make sure I compensate just to hear it straight up. So when I'm doing this rough mix, I can hear the difference. So I don't mind it being too heavy once in a while. But when it gets heavy, you want to make sure that I compensate for that. So sometimes I may do this kind of spread maybe with my EQ, rather than my panning, but I won't go straight up and down when I have a stereo field like this sometimes. I won't bother to do this. We end up going straight up and down, and we have like this, and for example, I'll play it back. Like you'll notice there's some sort of string pad in there. The guitar string pad. Then comes this little bell right here. That's all on one track in this one simple sound we got, where the keyboard's a split keyboard. So you have one sound in the left hand and one sound in the right hand. So what we tend to do here, and particularly for a pad like this, I will spread it out because I want to make sure those strings or the pads which simulate some type of string sound have that effect. So I will do that. I will compensate, mix these into a group actually. I'll play it this way so it spreads more. And later on, I'll add some sort of delay to it, so it's not like that little guitar is on both sides, but just going back and forth much faster than it is right now. But for right now, I just want to make sure I can hear it clearly. So what happens is that in Pro Tools, if you have something going left or right, it could be up by maybe 2.5 dB. So it's important when you are setting up your mix to realize that some instruments should be straight up and down pan. That means dead center, which is your low frequency instruments, your kick drum, your bass line, your snare, and some instruments like the hi-hat, I generally keep dead center most of the time, unless sometimes I'm mixing, I may let slide to the left or right once in a while. Never knowing, you know, it depends on what kind of mix I'm doing. If I'm doing club music or hip-hop or whatever. So it all depends on the genre that we're trying to do also. So I must make sure I'm within the genre of that kind of music I'm doing also. And I keep the vocals pan dead center. So you want to get started that way and make sure you watch out for anything that doesn't have the true characteristics of the instrument it's supposed to sound like. Remember that.